Shabbat Shalom. We are going to have a study on a method that God has given his people that was leaving Egypt at the time, consisting of Jews and non-Jews, people from all over, made slaves in the country and fleeing away as refugees, traveling together under the leadership of Moses, but not only Moses. And what God gave was the four-step plan, 4 steps as a special plan of deliverance, but not only geographically from one country to the other, but also within the soul of each person in the whole world. This is a plan that works universally. So it's good to go into this, and at the end I will get into the more details of this, but we build it up nice and smooth. And on this first Shabbat of the year 2022 already. Happy New Year to you. Have a good health and peace in your heart. There we go with the first text. In the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the second of the 5, the book of Exodus, chapter 6, verses 6 through 9, on the screen. Say therefore to the people of Israel, and therefore is pertaining to the verses just above, where God is saying, I'm the God that heard the people, I'm the one that chose you, I chose Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and I will deliver you. And he goes into it more in verse 6. Say therefore, because of all these things, to the people of Israel, I am the Lord. And God is making a statement there. He's saying, listen, I'm the ultimate authority in this universe. I will lead you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their bondage, and I will pay the price for you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment, and I will take you as my people. 4 acts, that are those 4 steps, and we will go into that. And I will be your God. You will know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for possession. I am the Lord. Again, the statement of the chain of command of which God is the top. Moses spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses. What? Because of disobedience? No, because of their broken spirit and their cruel and heavy labor they were forced to do for the Egyptians. So this is the text that we read from, with this very important end time text, because the fact that God spent so much time on this means that, and the content of it makes it as the end time deliverance that God has prepared for his people, all the people that are believers in the words of the God of Israel and of God himself. The interesting thing is that when Israel lived in Egypt, it was a good time, it was a comfortable time. Israel had a comfortable existence in the country of Egypt. But times changed, and with the change of time came misery. And when is the time to see that and to think, now this is it, we have to move, that enough is enough? It's always difficult to pinpoint the exact moment and not to be too late. They should have left earlier, but it's easy to say afterwards. Hindsight 2020. But their identity had become half Egyptian. They didn't have the freedom to develop their own culture, they developed their own religion. So they did not even see that they had changed in their thinking and in their responses. Therefore they had become blind for the necessity to return to not only their country, but also their true self. It's a very important statement, your true self. I believe that when God looks at us and he says, yes, I want you to be my child, he is seeing in us our true self, which is not making itself visible yet for normal earthly mortal eyes. But God is seeing it. That true self is something of the past, because God gave it to us to be worked out. The new man that is created, Ephesians 4 says. But that new true self is also something of the future, because God sees it, but the rest of us don't see it, and we need the time to develop into that true self that God already is seeing, is perceiving. We need to grow, in other words. In this case, it meant that fleeing away from the land of Egypt, because the Egyptians had become a threat, a death threat to Israel. Having said that, we need to realize that what happens in our own lives when we look at this text, not only in the literal sense, but also in the sense where we make it personal, is that we need to begin to realize that we need to change inside. We need to grow to our true self, because we don't, not by running away from setbacks that we might have in our lives, but to utilize those setbacks in order to be confronted with our own weaknesses and our own responses to setbacks, and where these responses come from, and then grow into the person that God is seeing in us, our true Adam, and to become children of Adam. I'm saying this in this special way, this term, because that term is used for Messiah. He's the Son of Man, Ben Adam in Hebrew. Ezekiel, of whom we are going to read text also, is also called Ben Adam. It's an honorable title for certain people on this earth, given in the Bible, who made true that true self that God had already seen in them. Okay, having said that, if we don't change inside, sometimes we cannot change our environment, but at least we need to change ourselves inside. If we don't change, if we think we have the luxury not to having to change, then we might think that by leaving the misery, that the change will come automatically by default. But then we got used to our blindness. If there is necessity of change, and for most of us there is that, we cannot run away from a situation. We need to make sure that there is something inside of us that we need to flee from. Our old self, our old blindness, our old lack of flexibility and of new common sense. The Jewish institution of Pesach, of the celebration of the Jewish Passover, has in itself 4 cups of wine, or at least fruit of the vine. Could be juice of grapes. Anyway, those 4 cups have their inspiration from the text of today. I want to read to you the verses 6 and 7 of Exodus again on the screen also. I will lead you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from their bondage. Lead out, the first step, the first cup. Deliver you, the second cup. I will pay the price, the third cup, for you with an outstretched arm and with a great acts of judgment, the third one. And the fourth one, I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. You will know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. Hey, wait a minute. Is God leading Israel out of the burden of the Egyptians? I thought it was Moses. Both. All of the above. God did it. Moses did it. Why is God saying that he does it? Because he wants to make sure that whenever something happens, you can lean on that person who does that special act for us, like the leadership of Moses, But be sure that God is behind it, and when He is, then at that moment, whatever happens, even if Moses is stopped in the act, like it happened in his life, and he wasn't allowed to enter the country, God is there to fulfill and to complement that liberation. So those 4 cups, you find them in the text of Exodus chapter 6, verse 6 and 7. And that leading away, visible in the first cup, was pertaining to Israel away from Egypt in the literal first sense, in the simplest translation and explanation of the text. Being led away from misery, from horror, is the first step in being freed, made visible in the first cup of Pesach. And we'll go into it later on, more at the end of the study, because we need to build up to see all the aspects of this. If we can do that in this study of only 1 hour. And the second cup is the cup of freeing up, being liberated from slavery in Egypt, or your own being freed from your own spiritual blindness, is the second step. The third step, also the third cup of wine in the Jewish Pesach celebration, is that there is a price that needs to be paid for our delivery, and that price is paid by God Himself. It takes a lot, because it's a supernatural act. If we are in captivity, who will free us? People cannot do that themselves. This was a very incredible act that was taking place there and unfolding, and God gave it in the hands of Moses, but it was a supernatural situation, more than the laws of nature could handle. That was for Israel, the being saved out of Egypt. The fourth cup and the fourth step in this 4 steps plan is that God accepts you. He acknowledges you. We'll get into it more. So speaking and thinking like this about the 4 cups of Pesach is of course a literal meaning with 4 real cups of wine, but Pesach also is done and celebrated with an eye on the heavenly reality and the heavenly power that we need in order to get out of a situation, especially when it comes to earning the position of eternal life, which is not an automatic thing. We need to work out our salvation. It says in Philippians 2 verse 12, we need to work out what God gives us, because He is already seeing in us this Son of Man situation. Yet we need to show Him that we're worth it. We don't work for we cannot save ourselves, but we can show to God that we are ripe and mature for it. We'll go into it more later on. For now, we look at it these 4 cups and these steps allow us to grow in insight, spiritual knowledge. Talking about growing insight into insight spiritually, you will see this being described in the texts today when you look at how Adonai, the name of God on earth, one of the names, allows us to know Him by the way He is treating the archfathers of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You read this in Exodus chapter 6, verse 2 and 3. It's on the screen. God said to Moses, I am the Lord. Authority. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as, and in the Hebrew text it says El Shaddai, but by my name YHVH, in Hebrew Yud He Vav He, a name, 4-letter name that we are not allowed to express, to mention in full, not so as to not to take the name of God in vain. By that name I did not make myself known to them. There is a difference in insight between the fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses. The names of Adonai are keywords for the diverse, various manners on which he makes himself known. Obviously, evidently, God is before the fathers in a different way, in a more limited way, known than how he showed himself and made himself known to Moses. Purpose? To show that there is this whole people of Israel that is increasing in insight and in knowledge, in spiritual knowledge, which also then gives a hint to each individual to allow to growth within yourself, spiritual growth, and not to say, oh, I know God because I pray regularly and I give my money to the church and stuff like that, or to the synagogue or whatever. That's not it. That's not the growing spiritual insight. The fathers knew the four-letter name of God. They knew the name, but they didn't know the significance. They didn't know God in that significance, in that meaning, more intimately. That means that Moses learned to know Adonai in a different way, in a more extended way, compared with the three archfathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He received more information about God with his name, with the four-letter name expressed as Adonai, and he had the spiritual level with which he was asking more questions. It was not blind faith that led him. The archfathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, did have this blind, strong faith, more faith than most people on earth ever had. The way they talked with God, the way God showed himself and made himself known to them and did things for them. That already gave to Abraham the medal of being righteous, being a tzaddik in Hebrew. When he looked at the stars in Genesis 15, Abraham asks him to come out of his tent, look at the stars at night, and Abraham is totally in awe for the beauty of the sky and Milky Way, and God says, your people coming out of your loins will be as numerous as all those stars. And Abraham, with blind faith, says, I believe you, God. It's great faith, but there is more to gain, which is shown to Moses. Blind faith that gave Abraham the title. God heard this answer from Abraham. Yes, I believe you, God, and he counted for him as righteousness. The first three fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, knew God only as El Shaddai. What does that mean, El Shaddai? It comes from a Hebrew verb, shaddad, that means to destroy. You might think, "Oh, that cannot be right," but it is, because there is two sides to God. There is the building up and the destruction. Fire of God is something that can destroy or can clean. There's two sides. It's not only love. If you hear God is love, go to the next book or the next movie, because that's not the whole story. Abraham saw God busy in his destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And people knew this and talked about this. And there is this image of God in Israel of you can talk to him, because that's what Abraham did as well. And he speaks with you. And there is a conversation, and a two-way conversation. And God allows his plans to be adjusted when Abraham was bargaining about the amount of people in the cities, perhaps good enough not to destroy them. But God can also destroy. God can also build up. There are promises that Abraham received about with this sacrifice, with the smoking oven, and stuff like that. So there's so much in the image of God that makes the name El Shaddai visible, the destruction, but also the upbuilding, and that this is the reality of God. There's a good way and there's a bad way, and you can choose life or choose death, light or darkness. There's also this significance of Shaddai. There's also this word dai inside that word, and dai in Hebrew, you hear it say, for instance, when children say to their teacher or their father or mother, dai. This is the Hebrew culture. You might not recognize this in your own culture, but children in Israel say dai, dai, dai to their fellow friends, but also to their teacher or their parents, and it means enough, stop, don't do this anymore. The real, or not the real, but the fuller meaning of this word dai, which is part of El Shaddai, is enough, is a full cup instead of a half a cup. It is something that is enough and is giving to satisfaction. In other words, beautiful, but there is more in God than only this. It's not there's something low and something high. No, there's something high and something even higher. And that's the difference between how God made himself visible to the fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to Moses. Difference with Moshe, with Moses, not only Shaddai, the beautiful deeds and show of power of God and the miracles bound to the laws of nature, but the name Yud-He Vav-He, the name, the four-letter name, is an extra attribute in God, meaning that powerful acts and miracles are done which supersede the laws of nature. And this is what you see happening when Moses is exerting his leadership. It would be good to make your own list, my own list of what you experience receiving from Adonai in your life, so that you can compare it a little bit with El Shaddai and this four-letter name. Are there situations where there are incredible interference in a good way in your life by God, or perhaps sometimes not so nice, but situations which helped you grow, or more than that, or even superseding that, and situations where you experience God in a supernatural way, where the laws of nature are broken, like Moses experienced with the stick that became a reptile and then it became a stick again, like that. Make your own list and see what happens. God is greater than our personal experience with him. It's always more than what we can see, because God is so much greater. His ways are higher. Whatever you see, whatever you experience, it stays, it sticks. Also, the picture, the image of Egypt in the people of Israel, they need to be delivered from it. We read today, already in the second text, week text, in the second book of the 5 books of the Torah. What happened until now is that Israel has been presented to the reader as people, not as a family of a father and 4 mothers and 12 sons. This people began with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The 12 sons produce 12 tribes, and the traveling and the spreading out of all these people, of the Jewish people. This is how this second part of the Bible, of the 5 books of Moses, starts. Before that was the first part, the Beriet, the Genesis, but that was a build-up to the situation we find out we hit when we read this second part, Shemot in Hebrew, Exodus in English. And while Israel is in prison, shall I say, in Egypt, it starts screaming, crying out to God for help. In times of despair and of misery, our synagogues and the churches are filled with people. And this calling to God is always effective. Also, in this situation we read about, he is freeing Israel, but the time schedule that God is using is not always ours. God has a different watch. It took 200 years of calling before God acted. But God needs a leader, and finally, after those 200 years, there is that leader that is according to the description, the job description of what Moses was able to do. Together with his brother Aharon, those two lead the liberation process of their people. Aaron growing up under his own people, Moses growing up and educated at the Egyptian court of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Unique combination, those two. The Lord speaks very priceless words, precious words to Moshe, and we have the privilege to listen in and to experience it as when it happened. That's possible because Moses wrote those words down. See Exodus 6, verse 2 and 3 on the screen. God said to Moses, I am the Lord, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then the next slide, Exodus 6, verse 2 through 5. I'm the Lord, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but my name, Yud He Vav He, I did not show to them. I also established my covenant with those three to give them the land Canaan, the land in which they dwelt as sojourners. Moreover, I've heard the groaning of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians hold in bondage, and I've remembered my covenant. Why waiting so long, God? And the answer might be, because I'm not the wonder doctor, the miracle doctor. I allow you to experience what life on earth entails, and that's not only nice and not only going forward, but also setbacks. Learn from it, take it to your advantage, or become a victim in a role of being a victim, and you'll never grow. And there is that choice that we have. So the Lord introduces himself to establish a relationship with his people, and the quality of that relationship is even higher than with the fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They knew the word Yud He Vav He, the four-letter word, but they didn't have the relationship. In Genesis 15, verse 7, that name, for instance, is mentioned there. So they knew the word, but not the relationship. This is different. And they had a relationship with him which no one of us ever had. I think I dare to say that, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it can even be higher with Moshe, who saw even more. And they didn't see miracles. They saw miracles, but not those that extend above and beyond the laws of nature. In the Midrash Rabbah, it is written that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, however believing and obedient they were, never asked the questions and dared to discuss with God as Moses did. So Moses had a greater faith with a development that we can learn from and see as a hint to go through that ourselves. There is high and even higher. And then God continues to say that he made his covenant with these three by giving them the promised land, Canaan, that would be called Israel a little bit later. So from that moment on, Israel is our country, the country of the Jews. Not everybody likes that, but it's the country of the Jews, and we're not an apartheid regime. We are a regime in which a Arab political party is also having its voice in the parliament. So don't say the words that show that you don't know what you're talking about. It's not an apartheid thing. It is a country which encounters all kinds of challenges, but it gives a good politically correct answer, and not only politically but also morally and ethically correct answer. This is how God has made this, and this is the reason that the land Israel is still our country, and we can go to it and live there if we choose and if that's God's will. And this is also the reason why the enemies of the God of Israel, fight also to have the possession of this country, in order to prove that God of Israel is a liar and that he's not that mighty and powerful as he states that he is. And God says he heard the voice of his children, so he knows, and he helps, and he comes, and he interferes, but at his own time schedule. And he shows himself like the name of this week, text of the week, Parashat Vaera is the Hebrew text name, the title of the readings in the Torah, meaning I appeared. He wants to be a personal God with a personal relationship with his creatures. Our God is real, and what he promises he will make happen. That whole process of the liberation of Israel is a model for the freeing of each real believer who loves our God, the God of Israel, and his Torah, and his people, and his Messiah Yeshua. And that liberation consists of 4 steps, and I'll talk about it later. I promised you I will. So let's go to the Haftara, the second of the 3 main texts, coming from Ezekiel 28. Let's read it. Thus says the Lord God, when I gather the house of Israel from the peoples among whom they are scattered, where in the meantime Israel was scattered into exile, lived in captivity in the land of Babylon, Iraq, Persia, Iran, that kind of neighborhood, and manifest my holiness in them in the sight of the nations. When I gather, they will dwell in their own land, which I gave to my servant Jacob. There they will dwell securely in it, and they will build houses and plant vineyards. They will dwell securely when I execute judgments upon all their neighbors who have treated them with contempt. See? Read the newspapers. They will know then that I am the Lord their God. In the 10th year, in the 10th month, on the 12th day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, there is this honorable, this honorful title to Ezekiel, the same title that is also given to Jesus, to Yeshua in the New Testament. Son of man, set your face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt. Pharaoh knew what it meant, those last words. Son of man, set your face against Pharaoh. Pharaoh has known what that means when Moshe turns his face to him and prophesies against him. No lack of speech, no lack of the possibility to speak. No hesitance anymore. 10 plagues, 10 blows is the literal word of in the Hebrew, is what Pharaoh could expect from God himself through Moses and his brother. Let's walk through those 10 steps, because you will see that those blows against Egypt are real judgment against Egypt, but blessing and producing spiritual insight in the heavenly reality for Israel. Let's go through the blows, the 10 blows against Egypt. The 10 plagues, better translated as the 10 blows. The first one is called in the Hebrew dam, meaning in English blood. Blood is what the drinking water in Egypt turned into. Horrible, because drinking water is of utmost importance. It's life-threatening when your water is taken away from you. Everything begins and ends with water there in those dry regions in the Middle East, and not only there. But why blood? Why not something else? Well, because there is the punishment for the Egyptians, but also the blessing for Israel. There is a sign in this blood. The Bible begins with blood when Cain kills his brother Abel. So there is a special thing going on there. It's a picture that God paints with several aspects. Blood is necessary for the sacrifices in the temples, for instance. The blood of Messiah is a expression in the New Testament which is not correct if you read it like that. I'm not going against the expression in the text. I'm just saying that don't think that this is meant literally, because Messiah did not bleed as sacrifices do, with a cut of a knife through the arteries in the neck of the animal. This didn't happen to Messiah, so it's not a blood sacrifice, but he died. So the word blood in that construction, blood of Messiah, his blood, through his blood and everything, is a way of expressing the fact that he died. That blood of Messiah, Yeshua, pays for the sins expressed in the third cup, which is also the third cup that Messiah is using, described by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 11. The cup of salvation. It gives us, those who believe in Messiah and realize that they cannot build that eternal life themselves, they cannot reach for it, they can, but they will not grab on and hold on to it, and they cannot produce eternal life themselves, because there is no eternal life in us. God needs to give it, and has this school of learning how to live with a capital L, which is our earthly life, and our realization that we are have our shortcomings, so much so that it costs God everything in order to be able to pay for our salvation. And giving us eternal life is a product of it, and also the cleansing of all unrighteousness in us. So that is more than only the blood, the water, drinking water that turns into blood. You know what I mean? The second cup, the second plague, the second blow, is the blow of the frogs. You see in the screen. In Hebrew, I wrote it as a in such a way that you can read it, tzfardeia, and it brings a lot of chaos and a lot of dirt and everything, those frogs, and they make life miserable and impossible. There's no order anymore. Tzfardeia in the Hebrew, coming from a Hebrew verb, tzafar, that means an animal that is jumping up and down, and it is a hint, almost like these little frogs that were a plague for Egypt, to the Jews. The hint: learn to jump, to come up out of the mud in which you are. The name of Moses' wife, Tzipporah, is also in this same word. And it is that woman that is not Jewish. Moses has married her. At the moment of their marriage, she became Jewish in the sense that she learned the religion, shall I say, of her husband. And it is a picture of Jew and Gentile coming together in a beautiful marriage relationship, which is also, of course, expressed in the Exodus from of Egypt, coming out of Egypt, where Jew and Gentile walked out of that land, led by Moses and ultimately by God Himself. The third cup, I'm using the word cup, I mean the word plague, the third blow were the mosquitoes, the kinim in Hebrew, from a Hebrew word that means root. Bad plague for Egypt, interesting image for Israel, because root is what Moses was dealing with. He was part of the root of Israel. He was one of the builders of the kingdom. And there is also in that word the word Canaan, which is an interesting word because you find it in the New Testament in the wedding in Cana, which is part of the same word. Why Cana? Because in this Cana miracle wedding, the Messiah performs a miracle that supersedes the laws of nature. He's able to turn water into wine. Something that alchemists have tried to do in the Middle Ages, turning lead into gold. Yeshua is able to do this, showing the power of God and showing that if you can reverse the laws of nature, you can also reverse the process of decaying and of being spoiled in the sense of the decay that a dead corpse goes through. That's the law of nature, and God is able to reverse it. So get hope of this in this third plague for the Egyptians, and an interesting panorama for the Jews, for Israel. The fourth one is stinging flies, arov in Hebrew. Swarm in meaning is a literal translation of that word arov, from a verb that means to exchange, in place, taking the place of, which is exactly what Messiah did. He took our place for everyone who understands and accepts and realizes the necessity of his death and resurrection. The fifth one is cattle plague, dever in Hebrew, dever, from a word, davar, which means word or matter. It's the words that Moses had to speak in order to bring salvation to Pharaoh, who never opened his heart for this. They say, the Bible says that Yeshua is the Word. It's an expression that happens, an expression, Yeshua being the Word. What it means when you say that is that Yeshua lived according to God's Word and was the embodiment of it. As the Psalms say, that the Word is eternal, is divine. The Word can bring curse, and the Word can bring blessing, depending on the one opening his mouth or her mouth. The sixth plague or blow is the ulcers, or in Hebrew, shechin. Leprosy also. It's an interesting situation. This is not a success for Israel. It is a picture of being vulnerable. If you want to have victory in your life, if you want to win the battle against the powers of darkness in yourself, let me say it like that, you need to take a position of vulnerability. This is what Messiah did. He became a leper according to Jewish tradition in the Talmud, the suffering servant, suffering Messiah, the son of Joseph, Ben Yosef, and brought victory because of this being vulnerable. Because of this vulnerability, God was able to work fully through him. The seventh, hail, frozen raindrops becoming bullets, or even bigger, like tennis or balls. Varad in Hebrew. It's a sign in the Bible of judgment, but also there is the verb varad, or the verb to come down, to descend, which is the interesting picture of God coming down from the heavenly reality to the lower realm of earth and mortality and visibility in the matter, in the world of matter and dust of life and death. So also there is an interesting picture that Israel was able to see, not having to suffer under this plague of the hail that the Egyptians went through. The eighth one is the grasshoppers, arbe in Hebrew, a horrible plague for people whose existence was depending on harvesting. All the harvest was eaten by these horrible creatures. And people who live in countries where these grasshoppers come and eat know what it means to have a thief who robs you from everything that you have to feed yourself and others. But for Israel, who didn't have to suffer under this, they saw the word rabbah in it, great, being great or becoming great or multiply, like Yeshua was exalted after his being raised, him being raised from the dead as promised and prophesied in Isaiah 53, where it says that he would have his guilt sacrifice and then he would see his offspring and have and serve and would fulfill the plans of God. Interesting picture in this eighth plague for Israel it was, and for those who in Egypt who saw this happening and chose to go out with out of Egypt with Israel into the freedom that God was presenting. The ninth one is darkness. Choshech in Hebrew. It is the being forced for 3 days to live in total thick darkness. That brings a culture and a society into chaos. In this word choshech, darkness, is the word chashach, that means to envelope, to make invisible temporarily, which is what Yeshua did. It was a text that this plague was a preparation for Israel to realize that Messiah would come, made visible in the previous plagues also, but he would be sort of invisible. And there was a reason for that, because this was done on purpose, so that people would not go for the show person that Messiah could have been made into by his followers. No, what Yeshua wanted was to draw people's attention to God, not to him in the body of a human being. So there is a big important meaning in this word, to make invisible, make yourself invisible, go into the background, in order that the hearts of blinded people who didn't want to throw off their blindness and judgmental people, that they would not recognize him. And we saw it in the Bible. Tens of thousands of Jews in the book of Acts. It's mentioned in the book of Acts chapter 21. It talks about not thousands, but tens of thousands. In the original Greek ground text, it talks about tens of thousands. Why did the translators diminish this? They had a purpose, not a good purpose though. Tens of thousands of Jews coming to faith. And in the New Testament, the same measurement is done for the non-Jews. Only 5,000 came to faith. So the Jews win. Also, the amount of Jews nowadays, the amount of Jews that doesn't recognize Yeshua yet because of all the bad theology that is put into his mouth, and also acts done by people who were celebrating Christmas on concentration campgrounds, made the Jewish people blind for the Christian Jesus. Understandably. It takes courage for Messianic Jews to come out and say bluntly and openly that we believe in Yeshua, but not the Christian Jesus, but the Yeshua of the Scriptures. And the amount of Jews who don't yet believe Yeshua as Messiah is growing in Israel. Also among Orthodox rabbis who say, yes, we believe that Yeshua is Messiah, but we will never become Christians. That amount of Jews that does not acknowledge Yeshua is much smaller than the amount of non-Jewish people in the world not recognizing Yeshua. Count for yourself. The last one, the 10th plague and final one, is the death of the firstborn son, the makat bechorot in Hebrew. Typically what Pharaoh was experiencing, but also what the God of Israel was experiencing when he gave his only begotten son to die for us. And the word son with God is in a different way. It's a different situation than the son of a pharaoh. But the same word son is used, so that's what we have to do with and deal with. So the plagues are the story of our liberation, of our delivery, of our salvation. Let's read and this all comes down to those 4 steps, which we will come to now very soon. Beriet Chadasja, the New Testament Romans text, Romans 8 verse 18 through 21. I consider, says Paul, Pharisee, rabbi, wise man, saying the same words as Yeshua has said, same thoughts, patterns, but also translated to people in the Greek world and non-Jews. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory, that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. Literally it says sons, but that also can mean children of God. For the creation was subjected to spoilage, not of its own will, but by the will of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself will be set free from bondage to decay and obtain the glorious liberty of the children of God. So there is built into the creation the fact that everybody has a date of being preserved, shall I say, like something in your cupboard, cheese or meat or something like that has a date on which that expires and you need to eat it or throw it away. Every human being has this same date of preservation after which we will go into decay. Is what Romans 8 says. That is a law of nature. And he says immediately also, but God, the 4-letter word, the 4-letter name of God, is able to break through that law of nature. We came upon it already earlier. It's also confirmed in this text. So the creation has this date of preservation that is being broken through. Decay is something that comes into our own bodies, also with restoration first, and then later on it's only decay, especially when you die. Think of as an example of your blood. Red blood cells live only 120 days in your blood, then they die, and new cells will come up, and they go in of course, not all of them die. It goes in such a way that we always have enough blood cells to live with. White blood cells, which is much is much in the news because of the virus infection corona, and the T cells with their memory and their fighting capabilities. White blood cells live only 2 days, and the little blood bodies in our bodies that help to clot the blood, so that we don't bleed to death, but that the wound will close. Those will have a time endurance of 10 days. An adult human being has about an amount of red blood cells in his or her body, each adult person, healthy, average of 25,000 billion red blood cells. They are so small, there's enough space for them. The body breaks those cells down and replaces them by new ones. Per day, our body makes 200, it's difficult to translate it into English, 200 billion cells. Per day, our body builds 200 billion cells. That's the breaking down and the building up, and this is the law of nature in our bodies. And God says there comes a moment when you will go into decay, and I will reverse that process and bring you back to life with a new resurrection body. At the end of our lives, when we die, after we die, the body is broken down. That is what God made as an integral part of the creation, with the hope, it says in the text, with the hope that we would learn Creator. And how do you learn Creator? By reading the Bible? No, by reading yourself, seeing your shortages and saying to God, I want to do business with you. I want to get away with the shortages and shortcomings. I want to get away with the blindness I have, because that only then I can learn you better, because then you are going to do things which I won't like, I guess, but at least I will get to know you. He has the power to break through the laws of nature and allow our bodies to come out of death and reverse that process. That means hard labor to ourselves, hard labor. No walking away when something happens to us that we don't like. You say, but there was this exodus from Egypt. Yes, of course. When there's death and threats of death, you need to run away. But when you are your own threat inside you, and blindness and judgment and misery and sadness and bitterness are taking over, you cannot run anywhere. You have to work on yourself to heal. There's this difference between Moses, where not only El Shaddai had revealed himself as El Shaddai with great acting and beautiful acts and miracles, bound by the laws of nature, but more than that, and bound by the acts of by the laws of nature. I mean, survival in the times of hunger, winning wars in times of enemies who were stronger than Israel, and yet we won. And very obvious successes in getting riches and possessions, and success in finding out new things, and discoveries in nature and in business and stuff like that, in medication and all these things. God gives. That's what the realm of El Shaddai does. Moses learned to know the four-letter name of Word of God with an extra capacity, meaning miracles that superseded, I already said that, the laws of nature, with as special attraction the resurrection from the dead. So let's now finish with those 4 steps of salvation. The 4 cups of the Jewish feast of Passover, the Pesach, found their inspiration in Exodus 6, verse 6 and 7. And the 4 steps, once more on the screen: leading away, delivering, paying the price, and I will adopt you as people. Those were the 4 acts that God would do, and they are acts that we can apply to our own soul, and it will be balm, and it will be giving a freedom and a delivery, and then when we realize these 4 steps, then we need to do our homework, throw away our blindnesses, allow ourselves to be honest to our weaknesses and stuff like that. So this leading away, made visible in the first cup, was for Israel going away out of Egypt, but could also be done in terms of being led away out of our, not from a place, but being led away from our own blindness. Learn to see our own blindness. That's number 1. Number 2, being freed, the second cup, from slavery, is a slavery that's not only outwardly, but also become an attitude and a characteristic internally. Spiritual blindness, an acceptance which we shouldn't have done. So that means we need to be delivered from this blindness, and also from the lack of will to change, and the fear to see your own mistakes, and then of course do away with those mistakes. And you can fill in the blanks of your own life in these steps. The third step, the third cup, is that Adonai is paying the price for our salvation. That was for Israel the delivery out of Egypt. But it can also mean your salvation from a certain characteristic, your character thing that is really bad, and you think that the whole world is against you, and it might be that you are turning the world against you. Like, for instance, wanting, desiring, demanding to have control on other people around you. It's a bad thing. You need to learn to recognize it when you have it. It might come and originate from a fear to being controlled, and then don't turn that into a control freak situation, because that's the wrong response. Then you look like someone who is fighting with someone else, and you don't dare to let go because of the fear that the other one would win. It takes supernatural power to deliver a person like that, and other situations and shortcomings in our character. And God makes known that He pays that price. That's the third cup. I will pay that price. So give up. I'm paying all the costs and the damages, not by power, not by damage, not by anything like a war by authority, but by vulnerability, by giving Himself in a vulnerable situation, allowing to be caught, allowing to be judged, allowing to be executed on a Roman torture machine called the cross, sometimes in the New Testament. That's what God did, how He did it, how He paid that price. And the resurrection power that this person coming from God, the Son of Man on earth, the shadow of Adonai in heaven, in the person of Yeshua, the resurrection power that allowed Yeshua to get up out of the dead, is the same power which allows you and me to be delivered from weak spots or damaging or threatening spots in our character. Be open now in your character to allow yourself to see that, to open yourself and change your life. It can be done instantly at this moment, which I pray for you at this moment. Weak spots which hold us as a captive on a dead street, a dead-end street. It was this third cup that Yeshua poured in, and about which Paul writes in his letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 11 verse 25. It's on the screen. Last text today, final text. In the same way as with the bread, it went also with the cup of wine after supper. Yeshua said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood," or the symbol of the new covenant in my blood. "Do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." That's the third cup. The fourth and final cup and step of liberation, deliverance, salvation, is that you realize that it is Adonai who accepts you, acknowledges you, loves you, allows you to realize that you are wanted, that you are a wanted person by Him. If by no other person on earth, by Him you are desired. He lets you know that you are very much desired, and that that He gathers you with the rest of His adopted children. We all are adopted children. We're not His children because of birth, physical birth, but spiritual birth. Born again is what the prophet of Hosea is talking about. And then in the New Testament, of course, repeated. Every person needs to realize that he belongs. Whether you're married or unmarried, or having been married, or a widow or a widow, living together or living alone in a cloister, monastery, in a family with many children, or as a hermit, every person needs not to be alone. And because every human relationship with people or with an animal, like a cat or a dog, a bird, boa constrictor, I once had a neighbor who had that. Every human relationship has that same date after which there is decay and it stops for one reason or the other. Every person needs a wants a longer lasting relationship than only this relationship which has an end. The God of Israel is then of course in the picture as the best candidate ever. With him it's not a cheap and superficial contact. That's not possible with the God of Israel. He has rules, regulations, demands things, all together in the document which is called in the Hebrew Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. It's much more than a document of rules and regulations. It works in such a way that when you study it and apply it in your lives, it causes a proceeding, increasing insight into yourself and a growing quality of the relationship of you with the God of Israel. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that marvelous? Yes, it is. And so I leave you with this thought on the first day of the month, the first month of the year, the new year, 2022, the secular year, as they say in Hebrew, that there are 4 steps given in the beginning of the Bible, second book already, but fairly in the beginning, where we can have our advantages. It takes a lot of courage to go through these 4 steps because we are confronted with ourselves. In order to come closer to God and know more about God, you need to know yourself, because when you know yourself and your shortcomings and you ask God to step in, whoa, that means also you're going to see God in a role that you don't like. But you need to go through it in order to grow. With that, I say to you, Shanti, Shabbat Shalom.